Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for those who are joining. Still a few people trickling in, so we'll just wait another minute or two. Unfortunately, Patrick Mann is not able to attend today, so I will be giving the presentation with several of our site leads at institutions across WestGrid. Just a little bit of housekeeping for those who are joining. If you can remember to mute yourself, just to reduce some of the background noise, typing, and conversation. If you want to ask a question, you can unmute or type it in the chat for anyone. If you are joining or watching the live web stream, you can send any questions you may have to info@westgrid.ca. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. If we can't address them in today's session, we'll make sure to follow up with you offline. Okay, so next slide. We thought we would just have a quick town hall portion today just to give some of the updates around WestGrid and Compete Canada, some of our upcoming training sessions, and reminder of the Visualize This competition that's happening. And the real reason for the session was with less than a week before the deadline for RAC 2019 applications, we wanted to give people a chance to just ask any questions they might have. A quick reminder of the presentation, the highlights that Patrick Mann, our Director of Operations, did in September and October. He visited several sites to give users advice on best practices when writing applications, things that the technical and scientific reviewers are looking for. And we have a number of our staff on the call today. So if you have any questions, we'll have a bit of an open Q&A at the end. People can feel free to ask. So next slide, just a few updates here. Just a quick reminder for everyone to mute themselves when they are joining. If anyone wants to see the slides in a greater, in a larger format, you can double-click on the screen share that Alex is, and it'll pop out into another window that you can resize as needed. So these were some of our recent maintenance that has happened in the past month, or that is going to be happening. So Orsness had a 2-day shutdown for some power systems maintenance. It was very successful. I think they were within an hour of their estimated time getting it done, so well done to the UBC team. A reminder for anyone using Orsness that it is a legacy system and it will be defunded and shut down. March 31st is our target. So if you're using it, make sure that you're migrating any really important data to another more stable site, because we can't guarantee the performance of Orsness the longer we go. It's almost a 10-year-old system. Cedar had several upgrades. There was a major 5-day outage. Martin will talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, so I'll shift over that. And then also the Arbutus team was doing some upgrades, or they're still doing upgrades to the cloud system, and we've got Jeff Albert who will talk about that as well. So I think next slide is Jeff.
Hey everybody, just unmuting here. So yeah, the Arbutus cloud production deployment is underway. The new equipment is on the floor and running, and the new OpenStack deployment is up and running and handling production workloads right now. So we've had a curated set of high-volume cloud clients, including the Atlas project and a few CC internal folks who've been kicking the tires and confirming that things are functioning and helping us test our migration process. So this is an in-place upgrade where we're going to take the new hardware, build the new production system on it, migrate everybody from WestCloud onto Arbutus, and then take the WestCloud hardware and fold it into Arbutus, so that the end result will be a system quite a bit larger than WestCloud was, and that has the full capability of both the old and the new hardware together. So that migration process is going to allow us to move a few projects at a time off of WestCloud, free up hardware from WestCloud, and move it over into Arbutus. So that migration process is going to be open for general availability pretty much now, more or less in the next week. We'll be sending out targeted communication to larger cloud clients and batch communication to more or less all other cloud clients, describing the self-service migration model and offering direct assistance. If you are the holder of a cloud project on WestCloud, or you know someone who is and want to get started on that migration process, you can do so now. Feel free to send a ticket to cloud@canada.ca and we can get you started on that. We've got a whole pile of new capabilities in this new system, including quite a bit better visibility into monitoring and alerting, and also a lot more OpenStack features that we can offer and certainly start to explore once the migration is well underway. So things like shared file system managed by NFS, stuff like that. So we'll be exploring that as we go on, and there will be no doubt further upgrades as we go forward, but I think that's what we've got for today.
Thanks, Jeff. Anyone have any questions about these upgrades or migration? Emails? Okay. And next, Martin will talk a little bit about our Cedar upgrade.
So at the start of this year's RAC, so in April, we actually put a major expansion of Cedar in place, 640 of the new Skylake nodes. The total system size of Cedar is now just above 60,000 cores, which actually makes it the largest system in Canada for now. The high-performance LinPack benchmark rating is about 1.6 petaflops, which is slightly better than what we had before. The reason that it's not roughly twice as much as before is that it becomes a heterogeneous system, and the LinPack benchmark doesn't run that well on a heterogeneous system. Anyway, we expanded the tape library, so we have about 50 petabytes of tape storage now. The Dcache expansion is still coming up but it will be in place for the next RAC round. Similarly, we will be expanding the project file systems to about 20 petabyte. That will in place for this upcoming RAC as well. Because of that expansion, we do not expect to have any problem satisfying storage requests on Cedar. I think that 20 petabytes should be ample space for everybody. With respect to upcoming work, we still have to implement the nearline file system where you can put files that are then going to be archived, similarly to the implementation on Graham. That implementation actually depends on the project expansion. We just have to put new equipment in place before we can implement the nearline file system. Together with a team from Arbutus, Cedar will get a cloud partition, so you should be able to request VMs, virtual machines on Cedar as well, just in the same way as you can do it on Arbutus right now. And finally, we are planning to move the current implementation of OwnCloud, which is our cloud storage system, over to Cedar, so that it becomes available for all Cedar users, and we'll upgrade the software version and put it on new hardware to just make this a more robust system as it is right now. Right now it's running on fairly old hardware. It is fully backed up, so there is no problem with data loss or so, but it's relatively old hardware it's running on. That's about it for Cedar.
Thanks, Martin. Big shout out to both Cedar and Arbutus teams. Been working really, really hard the past couple weeks to get this done. So a lot of tired people. Anyone have any questions? Okay. Next slide. So just a quick reminder, as I mentioned, Orsinus is defunding, so just make sure that you're migrating your data off and ready for that. Next slide. Just a quick recap, we had two fairly big meetings for WestGrid this past month. October 10th, we had our very first WestGrid AGM. We introduced our new board in March. Our very first WestGrid board was elected, and so our first AGM happened in Vancouver. We had a stakeholder presentation, which there's a link to some of the highlights of the slides there. It was really great. A nice chance to reflect on all the work that all the sites have been doing to support researchers. So I recommend taking a quick review of the slides. And then this past week, we were in Calgary with all the site leads from the WestGrid institutions and some of the other support staff to just kind of work on some future planning and review, how we can better support users, services, possible future resources. And just a reminder of what a great team we have, how everyone just comes together and collaborates really well. So it was a very enjoyable full day of meetings. Next slide. To continue to help us with our strategic planning and our future operations, we have launched today our 2018 user survey. So this is a continuation of the third year of this survey. We've reduced the survey this year, so it should be a lot shorter, just about 5 minutes. We just want to kind of stay on top of things and find out what we're doing well, what we can improve on, and what are some of the gaps in the current resources that are out there that WestGrid could perhaps step in and fill moving forward. So I ask everyone to take a few minutes to fill it out. There is an incentive of a $100 cash gift card, which we'll draw at the end of November. There's also a link there. You can review the results from last year. An update from the national side of things. Camille Marcinkowski, based at the University of Alberta, is working on the scheduler team, and the scheduler team recently made some changes. Oh, Camille's here today. Made some changes that will hopefully help those users without resource allocation awards get access and submit their jobs faster. Right now, 80% of resources go to the rack allocations with 20% left over, and previously that 20% was divided by every single person who had a Compute Canada account. However, many of those weren't active users, so the resulting priorities were very, very low. So from now on, or currently, that the priority will only be divided by those active users with jobs either running or in the queue. So let us know if this is working for people, if you're finding it easier to submit jobs, or if you have any feedback. I'm sure the team would be really appreciative to know. It's always hard to kind of find out how well these things actually work once we put them into production. Camille, do you want to say anything else?
No, you pretty much said everything.
So big shout out to Camille for all his work trying to make the scheduler better on an ongoing basis, and the rest of the scheduling team. Next slide.
All right, it's up to me now. So I'll just show a few slides about our current training activities and outreach. So just a quick reminder about the current WestGrid webinar series. We have a bi-weekly webinar series that is running every second Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Mountain. And the next webinar is going to be November 14th. Falk Herbeck, a researcher from UVic, is going to talk about his large-scale simulations of an entire star. And then we have an off-cycle visualization webinar on November 21st, same time, 10 a.m. Pacific. And then we'll wrap up with a two-part series from John Simpson, Humanities and Social Sciences webinar running applications in VM in the cloud. And then now we are putting together the schedule for next semester as well. So we will have 10 bi-weekly webinars in winter and spring semester. Today we'll have, for those of you at the University of Manitoba, this afternoon we have an event, 2-hour event at the University of Manitoba, Introduction to WestGrid Compute Canada Cluster Computing, hosted by Gregory. And if you are there, then we encourage you to attend this event for a general introduction. So all our current events are actually on the webpage, so bit.ly WG Fall Training, and we regularly update it, and there are links for, to registration pages, abstracts, and so on that you can find there. Quick reminder about the Visualize These competition that is running right now. So the competition started on October 1st, and we are right in the middle, so you still have 1 month to work on your submissions. So the idea is we provide 2 data sets. So this year is 2 data sets. One is molecular dynamics simulation. The other one is a humanities data set. And the data sets themselves are quite difficult to understand. So in the visualization, in the competition webpage, we actually supply several scripts and several sample visualizations that show you exactly how to interpret data. But then what you do with this data is up to you. So everybody who is interested in visualization, in data analysis, data processing, we encourage you to join the competition. Still 4 weeks to go. And we have actually some good prizes. We have the top prize is contributed by Dell EMC. It's a 4K 43-inch monitor, professional grade monitor, and then we have a number of SSD drives and other prizes. So I encourage you to apply. Still plenty of time to work on your visualizations. And my final slide about training, we have just a reminder that we have a training materials hub. So it is hosted on GitHub. It's at the following page. It's also linked from the WestGrid.ca page. And we put all our recent training materials on this webpage. So there are sections for getting started, programming in different languages. So we have programming guides and screencasts and video recordings and slides and lots of things. For programming, we have sections on OpenMP, on Chapel, MATLAB. We had a webinar a couple of days ago on MATLAB. And then the main topics of the main pages we currently have recordings for and materials for bioinformatics, for humanities, social sciences, and for molecular dynamics. For tools, we have sections on scheduling and visualization. I think there's something else. Some school materials are hosted there. And then all our recent announcements about training events are in the blog section. So please check this page out because we try to update it regularly, and there's a lot of useful material there. So on that note, I think we will now go to Rag.
Thanks, Alex. Any questions on any of the WestGrid or Compute Canada updates before we move along? So the rest of the session today will be about the resource allocation competition, which does close next Thursday. So please stick around if you're interested in this, or if you're not, feel free to check out, and we'll see you at the next town hall. So just a quick refresher, the resource allocation competition, all the resources across Compute Canada, 20% are reserved for opportunistic use. So any researcher who has a Compute Canada account can access these resources. They've been referred to as the Rapid Access Service, RAS. Then the other 80% we allocate through a competitive process, which is the resource allocation competitions, or the RAC. To apply for this, you must be eligible to hold a grant from a Canadian granting agency, usually a faculty position within Canada. Next slide. So just anyone who wants to access resources, the basic process here is to get your account and then use the resources through the RAS, through the non-competitive process. But if you need more, if you're just not able to get your work done, that's when you need to think about applying for this competition. So the next slide shows the minimum request levels to apply to RAC. And I mean, hopefully with some of the scheduler changes that happened, it will be easier for users to access the default resources. So it's really important that you talk to someone at your institution, or you email one of the support emails, support@westgrid.ca or support@compucanada.ca, and find out if you really do need to apply to this competition, because you might be able to get your work done just through the basic access. But there is the list of kind of the minimum requirements. Something important to keep in mind is that you might need, lower amount of cores, but if you have a high memory need per core, you will be charged for more, and we'll talk a little bit more about this further on. So if you have high memory needs, you might need to apply for an allocation, even though it seems like you're using fewer cores. The next slide, there's two types of RAC competitions. So there's the research platforms and portals competition, which is primarily cloud-based resource needs, scientific gateways that are providing resources to a large community of users. And then the other competition is resources for research groups, and that's a general, usually computation needs or storage needs. An important thing to keep in mind is that all allocations, whether it's default allocations or the RAC award, it's a scheduling priority. So you're not actually you're not guaranteed a set amount of resources, but this is the amount that you should be able to use over the course of a year when you submit a constant workload. If you have really bursty usage, you might get less core years, and you don't get to save up your allocation and use it at the end. So another important thing, again, is the memory requirements. So if your memory requirements are large, it will result in you requiring a greater allocation, and that's important to keep that in mind. Another important thing is there is no appeal process with the resource allocation competition. So make sure that you present all the information that's required so that you can be assessed scientifically and technically based on your needs, because you cannot correct after you've submitted it. And then here are the key dates to keep in mind. As I said, next Thursday, midnight Eastern time is the cutoff to submit your application. The fast track submission period has already ended, so if you did not get in and apply, I guess today. Oh, actually, last year apparently is the finish date. Today is the deadline for fast track, and then next Thursday is the deadline for, what's the date today? Yeah, next Thursday is the deadline for full reports. And the RPP progress report, so anyone who has a current research platform and portal award, you don't have to submit a full application if you have years remaining on your award, but you do have to complete the progress report by January 10th, and you will receive an email shortly with more details on that. And the awards for 2019 should be implemented by probably early April, actually, of 2019. Next slide. A reminder, if there's any new faculty or people that are experiencing a scientific breakthrough that does not fit within this narrow window to apply for a resource allocation, we do have OutofRound. So if you miss this deadline and you meet the following criteria, you can apply outside of this window. So feel free to email rac@compycanada.ca with any questions. So the reason we've started doing these presentations across WestGrid for the RAC is because there are such limited resources, and it is so competitive to get an allocation that we wanted to make sure our researchers knew what your application was what the criteria was, what the reviewers were looking at, what was most important, and just highlighting those things. As you can see from these two graphs, the requests have increased every single year, and unfortunately our resources are just not keeping up with it. So it's extremely competitive, and the next page shows that the most competitive resources are for GPUs. So if you need GPUs, we're only expecting that we can probably satisfy less than 30% of the GPU requests this year, even with the new system coming online in Quebec, which will be very GPU heavy. So if you need GPUs, make sure that you are providing a lot of justification, and I recommend that you talk with a support analyst to find out, ways that you can make sure that you're providing enough details. Next slide. So the way that we are dealing with this resource shortfall is by scaling the request based on your scientific score. So you can see here that those applications that received a high score, so the maximum was a 5, last year those applications with a 5 received just over 80% of what they requested, and anyone who received a score of less than 2 received nothing. They did not receive an allocation. So as you can see, it's a very, very competitive process. And the next slide just has some of the scaling parameters. The cutoff for 2017 was a science score of 2.2, and last year the cutoff was 2.0. So just be aware, at 2.0, the descriptor is strong. So, I mean, you really have to have a very, very detailed and strong application to get resources. This table shows the resources that are available to request for this year's competition. You can see that our systems, Cedar's up to 60,000 now, Beluga is coming online, which will be about 30,000 cores and about 600 GPUs. Niagara, Arbutus, and there should not be any legacy systems available this year. Next slide. Highlight a few of the main changes from those who applied last year's competition. There are no generic resource categories, so when you submit your application, you must request a specific system for your resource. If you aren't sure which system to request, there's a link there for the available resources, and as always, just talk to your local support person or email rack or support@westgrid.ca or CompuCanada. Some other changes this year, the competition will have enforced page limits. This is to try to cut down on those 45 to 50 page applications and make sure our reviewers have enough time to read everything. There will also be PDFs accepted only for the technical justifications. Past years we allowed Word files, but this year, to keep the formatting consistent and make it easier for the reviewers to access the files, it must be PDFs only. You are able to add a secondary contact person. One of the struggles that we've had is being unable to contact the PI who submitted the award, and so allowing a secondary person will hopefully help clear up any confusion that might come about when we review the technical reviews, etc. We've also tried to simplify the process by removing the streams that had been in there last year. So the RRG competition had been broken into large and small requests, but that is just one application form now. And same thing with the RPP application. There's no portal or platform. It's just one application for the competition. And a reminder that the progress report is required, and if you do not complete the progress report, your allocation will be expired and not renewed, even though you may have additional years remaining. So this part was Patrick's brainchild. Patrick and I worked very closely on trying to, we went through all of the past scientific reviews and looked at those applications that received really high scores and also those that received poor scores, trying to pull out what the common themes were, why certain applications got scored well and the areas that the other applications did poorly in. So just a quick highlight of our recommendations. First of all, use the templates. They're there for a reason, to make sure that you're guided along in terms of what information is required. There's a link there to both templates, and that way you'll ensure that all the information that's required is there. Another recommendation that Patrick gave was to ensure there's a narrative in your application, in your request. that you're, and this was emphasized by the scientific reviewers in many of the comments that they provided to applicants, to focus, first of all, on your science impact, the solution and techniques that you're addressing those challenges through, what technologies you're using, and then how that translates into your specific resource ask. So you need to frame the science with the compute that, or the storage that will be used to support that science, and connect everything and make sure it's really well justified. Next. When you're dealing with your resource ask, make sure that you are justifying it. Make sure that it, we understand that there's a resource shortage. So any inflation will be noted. We'll be able to tell what's not justified, and the requests are reduced because of this. Provide as many details as you can. Tables, project breakdown, make sure you're tying in all the techniques and science and HQP with your final ask and with the science that you're trying to accomplish. Next slide. This was an example, I think it's in the template, but to provide a chart to give details, especially if you have multiple projects that your resource is, that your application is for. So listing your team members, your estimated core years project, memory, and then details for why you need that. Sometimes a reviewer will have to make a recommendation to reduce your request because there aren't enough resources. So if you can clearly lay out all the projects, it helps the reviewers make a more informed decision or recommendation in terms of possible cuts. The technical justification part is very important. That's the first part that is reviewed of your application. That's reviewed by the Compute Canada technical staff across the country. And they're looking, especially for performance estimates, if you can show that you've run these simulations, you've run these codes, you know exactly what you need, it'll make your request that much stronger. Again, the projects that you're working on, any proposed research plan, and as many details about the techniques that you're using. So the memory request, I mentioned this before, most nodes are 4 gigabytes per core. If you need more than this, you will be charged, the scheduler will charge you based on what resources you are taking that others cannot use. So if you look into the next slide, Camille has given many, many talks about scheduling jobs and the importance of understanding how your memory needs relate to your usage. And John Simpson, I think, was going to just break this down a little bit more.
Yes. So what we have here on the screen is a schematic of what's happening here. And the point is, when we're scheduling, we want to make sure that when we tell people, when they receive an allocation, that they can have this many resources, assuming that they run fairly constantly and they run throughout the year, we want to make sure that we can satisfy all those requests. And so we've been taking account of memory in the background for quite some time, but now we're trying to move this idea of counting memory forward into the application as well, so that when a researcher receives their letter and at the end it says 40 cores, but then they've doubled their memory request over the course of the year, and rather than 40 cores for the year or 200 cores for the year or whatever it is, it turns out that they're getting half that. They need to understand the reason for that is because they're asking for twice the memory that's attached to each core, and they didn't make that clear in their application. So we want to remove that potential for confusion by explicitly requesting and then have it be explicitly stated by the researchers when they make the rack request how much memory they need to run the work that they need. And we understand that some of these can be quite complicated as you're running in different jobs and so on and so forth with different tasks. So when that happens, you just have to talk to the technical expert. So to go back to the slide that we have here, on our general purpose systems, we typically have 4 gigs of memory per core. And as long as you're staying within that 4 gigs of memory, 1 core is 1 core equivalent. But if you need to start extending the amount of memory that you need, then you're going to get into a point where 1 core or 2 cores isn't the same as 2 core equivalent. So we see that in the bottom left corner of this slide. Here we have 2 cores, but they only need 4 gigs of memory. So in this case, we're charging them for the maximum kind of core equivalent available. So they're being charged for 2 core equivalent, even though they're not using the memory on that second core. It's still going to count as 2 core equivalent. The one to the bottom right, here you can see they're using 2 cores, but they're using a little bit more memory, right? It's not 4, it's not 8, but it's going to be 10 gigs of memory. So they have to take that memory from another core, which starts to prevent somebody else from using that core. It doesn't prevent somebody entirely from using that core, because if another researcher only needs 1 core and then 2 gigs of memory, they could still run there. But that's not going to be everybody. So we're going to charge that researcher 2.5 core equivalent, with this idea of this base value being 4 gigs and 1 core attached to it. So that's what we're doing in the background. We're going to worry about the core equivalent calculations, and when you receive your letter with your allocation, it won't say core equivalent there. It'll just say 100 cores, for example. But it needs to be recognized that a researcher that asked for 100 or say 200 cores or 150 cores and then receives a letter that says they get 100 cores, but in that request they asked for 8 gigs per core, their 100 cores will be 100 core equivalent. Another researcher that only asked for 4 gigs per core might end up with 100 core allocation as well, but they're only going to be allocated 4 gigs per core. So we're going to have and we've always had a little bit of a discrepancy in terms of what it means to have a core. We're just trying to make this clear now and make it much easier for you to very directly request what you need so that we can provide it for you, and there's less misunderstandings at the end when all of a sudden it turns out you need to ask for more memory, and that reduces your allocation on the system. And the reason that happens is because you're preventing others from running on those cores, and so we're trying to take account of that. The next thing to note is on the next slide, right? And so we have different node types, and so if you're asking for larger amounts of memory, we are going to shift you around on the systems. And so you'll see that there's actually quite a variety of nodes that are available here for you to run on, and the best thing for you to do is to contact your local Compute Canada Federation expert to walk through how to actually make the requests that you need so that you're getting the resources you want. Because the last thing we want is for you to get 100 cores, say, but you didn't ask for the memory. And so it turns out that it's really only 50 cores for you by the time you take account of the memory that's available. The last thing about memory to note is on the next slide. And this is GPU memory. Right? So there's also a calculation that happens with GPUs to take into account the number of GPUs that you need, the number of CPUs that are attached to the job that you'll run with the GPU, and then the amount of system memory. So when we ask for memory and you're asking for GPUs, the value we need to see in the form is the system memory. This is the RAM that's available to the system generally. There's also memory on the GPU. And if this matters to you in some particular way, it's not something that we're tracking through the form right now. It's something that you need to raise in your application. And if you have any question about how to do that, you want to talk to one of the Compute Canada Federation technical experts or somebody from WestGrid, one of the WestGrid technical experts. They're the same people. And they're here to help you and make sure that you're asking in that right way so there's no confusion and you can have the resources that you need as cleanly as possible. And that's kind of a fast take on memory. And we're quite happy to sit down with you in advance of your application and walk through the memory piece with you and have you walk through your needs with us so that we're perfectly aligned.
Thanks, John. Any questions around that piece? Okay. Another important note for your application is your CCV. I know it is a pain for people to update, and we've tried to make it as easy as possible. It is looked at by the reviewers. There have been numerous conversations in the review meetings and on the information provided to applicants that, you know, if a CCV isn't updated, then they can't judge, you know, the most recent publications, science has been done, etc. So very important to make sure you keep that up to date. It's not required for fast track, but any RRG and RPP applications, there is a note that if you already have a CCV, you may need to delete that and resubmit it just to make sure that you have the most up-to-date version. There's a CCV submission guide linked there, or feel free to ask any of us or email support if you have any questions about that. The comments in the green are comments that we've pulled from actual reviewer feedback that were provided just for back up these recommendations. Next slide. Here's a couple of slides just about some of the best practices if you're applying for an RPP, Research Platform and Portal. I won't really go through these in details. The slides are available if you have any questions. Patrick's laid these out in pretty good detail, so you should be able to follow it through. Next slide. More information about providing justification around to demonstrate the development work that you've done or that you will do for your platform and how you intend to manage it. So it's not enough just to talk about the scientific need, but you have to also be able to demonstrate that you can maintain and manage this platform. Currently, CompuCanada does not provide cloud services beyond just providing the service. So it's something that we might be able to do in the future, but right now you need to have the resources to manage these platforms on your own. Next one. So a final guide for everything you could possibly want to know. There are some of the email addresses to send any questions about. There's links to different web pages and different resources that we've put together on our WestGrid website. We've got a whole slew of one-pagers, two-pagers, presentations, full 25-page guides. So hopefully you can find something in there that answers the questions that you may have. And if not, please just send us an email. There was a question that came through about requesting more resources through RAS, and you can request more storage or more cloud by emailing support@compucanada.ca. So I think Christine had asked that question from University of Saskatchewan. Are there any other questions that people want to ask? Any specific? This is kind of an open forum now, open Q&A session if anyone has any specific questions about an application or.
Erin, I just want to take the time to thank you for stepping in at the last minute to host this seminar today. Great presentation, and also to all the other speakers. And I just wanted to clarify something in terms of the deadline for RAC. So will there be any extensions available this year, or is November 8th a very hard deadline that people should try their hardest to meet?
November 8th at midnight is a hard deadline. There are no extensions. So just the scale of the applications, just not possible. Very tight timeline. Any questions or concerns? Well, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today. Thank you to all our staff for being on standby to answer any questions. Definitely do encourage people who are submitting applications to talk to your local research computing staff or send an email to rac@compucanada.ca or support@compucanada.ca. And it's always better to double check. Good luck, everyone, and send us questions anytime. Thank you.